Hey, welcome back from Chabrutot. I know I went into a bunch of the rooms, and I know that some people will manage to get a little farther, some people less so. Like I said, everything you did in Chabrutot is useful, and I'm sure it got you thinking about the subject, and I'm now going to bring everything together. What you might have noticed already is that the Ir Miklat is, let's even start by what it's called, Ir Miklat in the Torah. That means a city of refuge. But already we can see that a city of refuge is already a term that only relates to one element of what's happening in this section. And in fact, if you talk about Ir Miklat, I would look particularly in Sefer Dvarim, because if you notice in Sefer Dvarim, and I highlighted the key words here, whoops, I just went a little too far. The key words here are all about somebody who is on their way and they're running, and they committed this, this terrible accident happened. And there's a lot of, I bolded the word, prepare the way, split up the land, pen your dof goel hadam. Maybe the relative is going to go chase you. And then it even says, if you end up with more land, then you have to set aside more cities, because you have to help protect this individual who is now going to get possibly murdered by the family who wants to avenge the death. Now, that's something, if you think about, I mean, I know nowadays this might happen, but it doesn't happen as much nowadays. This sounds very tribal type of thing, where you have a family member who gets very angry because someone killed, and then they go and they have a vendetta. And this element of it is a little harder to understand, I think, from a modern eye, although I shouldn't say not at all. You don't, unfortunately, you do read stories like this, but it's not the typical, not the norm. But it is this very much place for protection. Hu yanus, he will run. How does he get there? He gets there by running from the scene. And it's not like a hit and run where he's trying to avoid responsibility. It's more that this person who committed this horrible, terrible thing to happen that he didn't even really mean to do, or she didn't mean to do, needs to be protected. That's really the theme of Sefer Dvarim. And it's really what it sounds like from the word Ir Miklat. But if you go to Bamidbar really seems to be talking a lot more. First of all, the word Rotzeach comes up a lot, murderer. Even if we take this, the title of the Shiur, accidental murderer, is almost an oxymoron of types, because you're a murderer sounds like you did something intentional, and accidental is you really didn't mean it. And in the Hebrew term, Rotzeach is a murderer, right? And they call him a number of times the Rotzeach. Even when he's running to the Ir Miklat, he's called a Rotzeach over here. And there's judgment, there's a court, he's going to go Lamishpat, Vishaftu Aida, and they have to distinguish. This is what we talked about earlier. Was this done intentionally? Was it not done intentionally? So we seem to have these different themes. And if you talk about Mishpat, and then you fast forward to the Mishnah, if you notice the Mishnah, let's go to question 3, immediately starts with Eluhen Hagolim. These are the people who go to exile. Now, whoever called this exile, did you see the word exile in the Torah? Didn't say exile anywhere in the Torah. And it's very interesting that the Mishnah chooses, as I mentioned before, it's in the section of these are punishments you get for various things. These are the people who get the death penalty. These are the people who get lashes. And smack it right just before the lashes, it says Eluhen Hagolim. These are the people who get exiled, which seems to be indicating that this is a punishment. So while we have on the one hand, it's protection, we have on the other hand, it's punishment. And now, if you view the Mishnah as punishment, I think what a lot of people were confused about, and I have to be honest, you're not the only ones who are confused about this, but the commentaries were confused about this as well, is the contents of this Mishnah. So let's start learning the Mishnah, and then we'll take some perspective on this. So the Mishnah says, Eluhen Hagolim. These are the people who go to exile. Hahoreg nefesh b'shgaga, if you murder somebody accidentally. You're in the middle of rolling a roller, and the roller falls as you're rolling downward. Again, you're going downward. You're lowering a bucket, and it falls and kills somebody. You're going down a ladder. V'nafal alav. By the way, nafal alav could be one of two things. It could be the rung fell from under you and smashed the person, or it could be you fell on a person and killed him. Harei ze gole. In those three cases, you're exiled. Aval im hayam moshech b'margela. But if you were pulling it toward you, v'nafla alav, and then it fell, v'haragto, or hayad dole b'chavi, you were pulling the barrel up. V'nifsak hachevel, and as you're pulling it up, snaps. V'haragto, or hayawole b'sulam v'nafal alav harago, or you were going up the ladder. So we're talking about the exact same actions, just instead of you going downward, you were going upward. Harei ze eino gole. You don't go to galut in this case. Now, if you take galut as a punishment, then what would you say? You don't need to get punished in this situation. And that's one possible way to read the Mishnah. But the real question is, and there's two questions. Number one, is it really because you're less liable in the case where you're going upward? Or is it actually that you don't have to go to get punished? You don't deserve punishment. And that would be because maybe derech aliyah is less severe. So it's actually, I'm going to leave it right now as an open question because it's not really clear. But with the Mishnah gives us a rule, which is interesting because you would expect a little more of the rule. But the rule, because again, doesn't really tell you very much. Zeh haklal. Kol shebederech yiridato gole, v'shelo b'derech yiridato eino gole. If you're going downward and it happens, you go to exile. If you're going upward, then you don't. Now, what's interesting about this? What's interesting about this is that the complicated nature of Ir Miklat is that there's several different elements going on here. What are the several different elements? As I said, in the Torah, you see, number one, it's protection. Number two, it's punishment. So those are two opposite things. Protection is good for you. Punishment is bad for you. So we're stuck here into trying to figure out if you don't go to the Ir Miklat, does that mean you don't go because you don't need to get punished? Or you don't go because you don't maybe need protection? Okay, again, why might you not need protection? When I was having this discussion in one of the rooms, perhaps the people are going to revenge your death if you were somewhat responsible. But if you were totally not responsible, or again, if you saw the scale that Maggie designed so nicely, which gives you this scale of how much are you responsible? Are you karov l'shogeg? Are you karov l'mezid? So I'll pull it up right now, but I want you to think about if we're going to say that you don't go because you're close to an intentional murder, then basically we're not saying you don't deserve punishment. Of course you deserve punishment. You're worse, right? But then what don't you deserve? You don't deserve the protection. Okay. If we look the other way, then we have, let's say you're karov la'ones, you're less responsible. Then we might say you don't need the protection or you don't deserve the punishment. So because it has these two elements, and I even want to add a possible third element, which is we're going to see in other shiurim as well, that in this topic, that there's another third element, which is the element of atonement. And this is where I go back to that article about this woman saying that there's no self-help books and what is someone supposed to do when they get stuck in the Ir Miklat, when they accidentally murder someone. And the question is, what are you searching for really, right? You're going to live your life with guilt for the rest of your life. You're going to say, oh my goodness, I'm going to carry this around for the rest of my life that I accidentally murdered someone. That's a horrible feeling. And what are you searching for? You're searching for atonement, right? Whether we call it therapy in the modern world or we call it atonement in the Gemara world, but that's what you're looking for. And then again, it plays into both these worlds. Either it's so not severe what you did that you don't even need atonement, or it's so severe that you don't deserve. The Ir Miklat is not going to atone for you. And there's that element as well. So we have these three elements: punishment, atonement, and protection. And they play out in all of these scenarios, and it's sometimes unclear about how exactly they play out. So let's go back now, and let's go back to the sources. But that's the real gist of what's going on here when we think about these cases. So What I want to point out about the Mishnah is two main things. Number one, we have Eluhen Hagolin, which is a new term that the Mishnah coins here that was not mentioned in the Torah at all. It definitely sounds like punishment. And the second thing is we have this derech yirida. We understand derech yirida, you're liable. Derech aliyah, you're not liable. But derech aliyah, as we explain now, could go in two different directions, and we're not really sure which way it goes. Whether it means you don't deserve to go to Ir Miklat I would say you don't deserve the punishment of Ir Miklat, or because you're karov la'ones, or you don't deserve the protection that Ir Miklat provides or the atonement that Ir Miklat applies because what you did was really not a good thing and you should have protected yourself more. Now, the directions of where to go, I'm going to wait until we get to later at the very end, the Tosfot and the Rambam, who try to give some explanations for it. Okay, we might have expected that the Gemara would, and in fact, it's very interesting that the Gemara doesn't. Okay, so now what do we have in the Gemara? Minahanemile. Minahanemile is a question. Since we're learning methodology here, we're going to know when you see certain words, you're going to know what's about to happen. Minahanemile is always a question. It sometimes is written this way. It could be written as one long word, minahanemile, just one word. It could be written out, like here it's written in abbreviation, mina he mem hanemile. So minahanemile means where did these words come from? Okay, so from where do we know this? Now, usually it's referring back to a halacha or often a mishnah. Where do we know that what? Now, we don't really know what the question's about because there's two things in the mishnah. One is that derech yiridah you're liable for, and one is derech aliyah you're not liable for. But from the answer, we're going to know what the question is, which is, by the way, to make it easy for you, and if you want to review, I wrote in all the answers, and this answer sheet is going to be on the course website. So if you're registered for the course, you can access this afterwards and go through all the answers to the questions. So what is the source? So Amar Shmuel answers, De Amar Kha. Amar Kha means the pasuk says. Okay, sometimes they call Torah mikra. It's another synonymous word for the Torah. So the pasuk says, Vayipol alav vayamot, ad sheyipol derech nefila. Says, and it falls on him and he dies. Okay, this is one of the psukim. Okay, I brought the English translation here. Bamidbar 35:23. Okay, if you look here for a minute, I'll show you. This is the text of the Gemara. Minahanemile Amar Shmuel Damar Kha. There's a one over there. You see that one? In different Gemaras, it appears, sometimes it's a circle, sometimes it's a different letter. In this Gemara, it happens to be a number one. And the number one takes you to the side here, which is the Torah or. And when I was learning in yeshiva many years ago, they didn't have this, but now they used to have it like a little note on the side that told you the chapter. It didn't tell you the verse. Nowadays, they make it super easy. It comes with the chapter, the verse, and they even bring you the whole verse. They don't just tell you where to find it. They give you the whole verse on the page of Gemara. It makes it very easy. So, vayapol alav vayimot, here's the whole pasuk. O bechol even asher yamupa belo ra'ot. Okay, if you hit someone you had a rock, a stone you didn't see, vayapel alav vayamot, and you drop it on someone and he dies. And it happens to be someone you're not an enemy of, and you didn't want any harm for him. And then it seems pretty clear at that point that you didn't do this intentionally. So now what does Shmuel say from this? He says, vayapol alav vayamot ad sheyipol derech nefila. Because the verse describes it as it's falling, it has to be falling in the way going down. Now, this, by the way, doesn't mean that, right, you could have been going upward and it fell downward, right? But the way he understands it is that your action had to have been going in a downward direction. Now, one thing I wanted to point out about Shmuel, first of all, there's two different versions. Shmuel says, ad sheyipol. Ad sheyipol sounds very much like you weren't even doing anything with it, maybe. It just fell, right? It's almost like you were holding something and it fell. Like you weren't even, it seems even much more karov la'ones, as we say, closer to less responsibility, right? That you have really nothing to do with it, and yet you'd still be responsible, according to this. Rabbeinu Hananel has a different version. Okay, he changes a vav to a yud. He says it's not ad sheyipol, which is until it falls. It's ad sheyapil. You make it fall, okay? Which again, both of them connote downward direction, but already in that one line of Shmuel, there's different approaches about where exactly on this intention scale, as I called it, this intention scale, where do you fall? How close are you to having some sort of responsibility for it, some sort of right, or much less responsibility? So even in that one line, there's already a bit of lack of clarity about what you're responsible for and what you're, when you're going to go to Ir Miklat or not. So now let's go on. That's our first Gemara, and there we have Shmuel basically giving us this explanation which seems, again, if you go by the simple and not by Rabbeinu Hananel's version of the text, because sometimes there's different versions of the text based on, again, you can imagine why a difference between a Yud and a Vav, which actually in this case makes a big difference, which is, again, how much you take an active role in bringing this about. Okay, let's move now to next section of the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan. Tanu Rabbanan is an opening to a Braita. A Braita is a source from the Tanaitic time period, which is the time period of the Mishnah, that didn't make it into the Mishnah. It's an outside. Bar means outside. Okay, like simchei bar in Hebrew are wild plants because they grow outside, wild. So bar is outside, and Braita is something that was outside and didn't make it into the book. But they're quoted all the time by the Gemara because everything was passed down orally and people like to quote this. How do you know how to punctuate in this case? We're going to learn some skills about punctuation. So Tanu Rabbanan means the next words are going to be a Tanaitic source. Tanaitic sources are generally in Hebrew. So as soon as you switch to Aramaic, you know already that you're out of the Braita. That's your usual clue. Bishgaga, prat lemezid. So here I helped you out and I told you that they're going to start quoting from verses in the Torah. And if you managed to use the Torah, or you could figure out which of these words they were quoting. Bishgaga actually appears twice in the Psukim, both in Bamidbar 35:11 and 15, and the word bivli da'at, without your knowledge. So here we have Bishgaga comes to say, prat lemezid. You go to Ir Miklat if you're shogeg, as we say, that's accidental, but not if you murder someone intentionally, which is an absolutely ridiculous thing to say. Of course, if you murdered someone with intent, you wouldn't go to Ir Miklat. So it's a very strange Gemara, a very strange Braita, which the Gemara is going to immediately question and say, what on earth are you talking about? Sometimes, by the way, you might be learning Gemara and think that something sounds a little bit out there and doesn't make so much sense. And sometimes if you get stuck on it and you try to just figure it out without moving on, then it's not a good move, because oftentimes the next question, the Gemara, is going to be exactly what you're thinking. Of course, it excludes mazid. What do you mean? If you're mazid, you're going to get the death penalty. Of course, you don't go to the refuge city. So we'll get there in a minute. Bivli da'at prat lemitkaven, which, by the way, mitkaven is to have intent, which is not much different, okay, especially if you look at the English translation. It's quite confusing because unintentionally to exclude intentionally, unawares to exclude with intent. What's the difference between intentionally and with intent, right? It's not exactly so different. So mezi would be kind of you did it on purpose, I would say. And mitkaven is you did it, you intended to do it. Okay, still they don't look so much different, to which the Gemara is going to question. Okay, I didn't bring the continuation of the Gemara where the Gemara questions the mitkaven also. But mezid, the Gemara says, pshita, it's obvious you're not going to be liable if you're not going to go to the Ir Miklat if you intentionally murdered someone. Bar katlahu, you're liable to death penalty. So Amar Rava, so first of all, pshita is a question that the Gemara likes to ask a lot, which is, this is totally obvious. And things that are totally obvious just shouldn't be mentioned in Tanaitic sources, right? The idea of a Tanaitic source is to teach us something we didn't know, but if it's so obvious, then they don't need to teach it. So Amar Rava now explains, Ema, what is Ema? Ema is when the Gemara says, change the wording. This isn't really the wording it should have said. When it said mezid, it didn't really mean mezid. What did it mean? Prat le'omer mutar. It comes to exclude someone, this is fascinating, who thinks it's okay to murder. Try this on the street. Try asking around. Do you think it's okay to murder? Right? You think you find people who said, oh, I didn't realize it was forbidden to murder. I had no idea. Seems a little strange. But Rava says, what does it mean, mezid? It doesn't mean fully intentional. Again, if you go back to that scale, it doesn't mean we're on the mazid all the way at the end side, but it means you're omer mutal. You didn't realize it was so severe if you murdered. And okay, now we all know, what do you mean? That's crazy. Of course, you should have known, but we're going to put you somewhere in general, by the way, in Jewish law. You have to be warned in order to get the death penalty. You have to have been warned to know that this is the penalty you would have gotten and that you're going to get the death penalty if you kill someone, blah, blah, blah. So it makes sense that you wouldn't be murdered. You wouldn't get the death penalty for this, but you're obviously not going to go to your miklat because, again, you were close to mazid. So that's what Rava says, Bishkaga prat lemezid. What they really mean by mazid is you're close to mazid, you're omer mutal. To which Abaye, and this is the really fascinating line, and I want you to think about this. Maybe someone can explain it to me because I'm struggling with it. Amar Abaye, I omer mutal, anusu. Again, we have this huge gap between, do you think it's on that side of shogeg or that side of shogeg? It's obvious to everyone that omer mutar is going to be excluded. But if you're going to learn it from this word, prat lemezid, and you're going to say it's referring to omer mutal, Abaye says you can't possibly say that the word mazid means omer mutal, because someone who says it's permitted to murder, he actually had no idea, and therefore he's so not responsible. Okay? I don't know how Abaye gets away with saying this. It's a very strange approach, attitude. We definitely don't hold this way, just so you should be aware. And he basically says that omer mutar is anusu. So Amarle, Rava says back to him, Shani omer mutar karov lemezidi. Who? Rava says, I beg to disagree. I don't think that omer mutar is where you think it is, and that's why I'm sticking with my answer. The bishkaga prat lemezid is really karov leones. So if we go to here, right, this is where I mapped it out for you, which is where do they go on the scale? Again, we have this debate whenever, because this is what's fascinating about your miklat. Anytime someone's exempt, they both agree that you're exempt if you're karov leones or karov lemezid. The question is just going to be, right, both Rav and Abaye think that if you think it's permitted to murder, you don't go to your miklat. The question is, do you not go to your miklat because you are way worse than someone who killed b'shogeg, or are you in a much better place? Okay, do you not need the ir miklat at all to protect you? Okay, so that's, again, Abaye and Rav are having this debate about another situation. Okay, so here, right, again, I wrote here, it's the punishment, right? In other words, Abaye says you don't need to go because you don't need to be punished for this, because you didn't even know it was forbidden. So of course you don't need punishment for it. It's how can you prevent, theoretically, what's the shogeg? You were supposed to prevent the situation from happening, but how can you prevent it from happening if you don't even know it's forbidden to do? Okay, so either he doesn't need the punishment, or he doesn't need the protection, or maybe he doesn't even need atonement. Right? It can fit into all those issues we've been discussing. And Rava said, you're not allowed to go because you're in a bad place, right? You're not going to get the death penalty because you weren't warned, you don't have all that, but you also aren't going to get protected. And that means, by the way, that if the relative decides to go kill you, they're not held accountable. It's fine. Like they can get away with it. Okay. They're not going to get punished. Whereas if you're shogeg karov leones, and someone asked this in one of the breakout rooms, just because you're shogeg karov leones, maybe they think that you did it purposefully, or they think that it wasn't so accidental and you should have protected yourself from doing it. Well, the fact is that if you're shogeg karov leones and you don't have to go to this ir miklat and you don't get the protection, if the relatives were to kill you, and that's the big difference between Abaye and Rava here, if the relatives were to kill you, because you're not in the refuge city, they're going to be held accountable and they'll be punished in court. They'll get the death penalty basically for killing you. So they might claim we don't think it was karov leones, but if the court rules it was karov leones, they're going to get killed for killing you. Okay, next Gemara is an interesting Gemara. We have a case of two Tannaitic sources. Again, these are all good examples of classic Gemara sugyos. We have two Tannaitic sources that completely contradict each other. So we have, again, I didn't bring all of this in front of you, but we have a ger toshav. A ger toshav is someone who takes upon themselves to keep the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 Noachide laws. They live in the land of Israel. They keep the laws. They're called a ger toshav. They're not Jewish, but they're called what we call a ger toshav. So there's one source that says that a ger toshav goes to the Ir Miklat. And there's another source that says the ger toshav gets the death penalty. So Rav Chisda, as well as a number of people on that page on Daf Tet, try to figure out how do we resolve this contradiction. One says this, one says that, and everybody tries to say, oh, lo kasha, this is not difficult. Kan blah, 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 kan blah, blah, blah. We're going to say one source is one situation and one source is another situation. So now we get back to our derech yirida and derech aliyah. So Rav Chisda says, and here you're going to see the two approaches in the Gemara, whether derech yirida is more strict or is worse, or derech yirida is less bad. So Rav Chisda said, kan sharago derech yirida, kan sharago derech aliyah. How does that work out? Derech yirida di Yisrael gale. When it comes to derech yirida, if you're a Jew, you go to your miklat. So ihunami sagele begalut. So he's also going to go to galut. Okay, we're going to say it's the same law. So that works. But derech aliyah di Yisrael patur hu neherag. But derech aliyah, now you're going to have to say according to this that what? Derech aliyah is obviously more severe, closer to mazid. Because we're going to say this, a Jew can't get punished for accidental murder that's close to mazid. Why? Because it doesn't have warning, it doesn't have all these things. But a ger toshav, we can actually put him to the death penalty because he doesn't have all those laws that we have, and therefore we can kill him. But Amar le Rava, Rava says, what are you talking about? It's totally the opposite. V'lav kavachomer Uman derech yirida Yisrael gale, when it comes to derech yirida and a Jew goes to your miklat, ihunami sagele begalut. Okay, that I get. But derech aliyah Yisrael patur, ihu neherag. Rava is having such trouble understanding what Rav Chisda said because he says derech aliyah is so much more lenient. You're going to say derech aliyah is more lenient, and because of that, you're going to kill this ger toshav? That's crazy. You're not going to go all the opposite direction. So basically, you have this now you finally get the machloket in the Gemara between derech aliyah. If you're killing someone while you're in the middle of doing an action going up, we're going to basically, according to Rav Chisda, we're going to think that's, again, let's go to our scale. Rav Chisda is going to put it on karov lemezid over here. And Rava is going to put it on karov laonis. Okay, so there you have the big machloket. Now, what I want to go into at the very end here is we're going to finish up and wrap up with Rambam and Tosfot. And we're going to get to really what's the difference here. So the Rambam in Hilchot Rotzeach and Shmirat HaNefesh, which is about someone who murders, he says the following, okay? And I know some people in the Chavrutot mention gravity, and the Rambam mentions gravity, and we'll see what the Rambam does with gravity and how derech yirida and gravity affects the halacha. So the Rambam says, I'm not going to read the beginning, that's basically quoting the Mishnah, okay? But he says, if you killed someone in one of these ways that the Mishnah said, he's not liable, and you get exile, and this is considered something beyond his, sorry, am I reading it right? Right, no, I'm sorry. If you're lifting a barrel, sorry. He's talking in the first, this is what I want to read. The first paragraph, he's talking about derech aliyah. You're lifting a barrel with a pulley to pull it up to the roof. It breaks, causing it to fall. Or a person was climbing up a ladder and fell, etc. They don't go to exile. Why? This is considered to be something beyond his control. For this is not something that is likely to happen, but is rather an extraordinary occurrence. The Rambam says it's very unlikely while you're pulling something upward that that's going to happen. By contrast, he says that if you're lowering it, why is that going to be the case that you should be responsible? And he says basically, right, an object that descends frequently causes damage. Indeed, it is likely this will happen for the nature of a heavy object is to descend downwards speedily. So he basically says that gravity is pulling it down. And because gravity is pulling it down, that basically means that you should be more careful. And you weren't careful. But while it was going up, you shouldn't have expected gravity to be pushing it down because you were pushing it up. And therefore, it was unlikely gravity was going to pull it down. Okay, somebody in the Chavruta, Judy, said that gravity actually helps you lose control. And let me try to remember if I get what Judy was saying, and that if you're going upward, then you're more responsible because, I'm trying to remember now, what was the logic? Because it's all your force that caused it. When gravity is pulling, it's not necessarily your fault. When you're pushing it and it's your pushing that made it fly off, then you're fully responsible, right? Or more responsible. So you can actually play with the gravity in two directions. But the Rambam clearly thinks that it means the derech aliyah is what he even calls in Hebrew a pele. Pele. It's like something totally and utterly unexpected. But the Tosfot, I believe, views it the other way. And Tosfot says, and by the way, I want to just point out one more thing before we finish up with the Tosfot. The Rambam, in saying that this is a pele, this is something wholly unexpected, he seems to be focusing on the punishment element, that you don't deserve to get punished for doing something that was beyond your control. Seems to be very much punishment focused, that that's the real issue. Okay, whereas in the Gemara, we saw a lot of different pulling, we think all at the same time. The punishment, the protection, are you deserving, do you get the atonement, all that. The Rambam seems to be pretty focused on the punishment because he says, if it's so unexpected, well, then we're not going to blame you for this. Tosfot, on the other hand, uses this methodology called lo zo af zo. Tosfot likes to ask this question, which is, it's a typical type of question Tosfot would ask, which is there's three cases in the Mishnah. Why do you need all three cases? What was so unique about each case? You could have just given one case and we would have gotten the idea. Especially not only that, it said Zeh HaKlal, and this is the principle. So he says the methodology is lo zo af zo. What does that mean? It means first they take the simple, obvious case, and then they tell us the less obvious case, and then they tell us the even less obvious case. And what he says is brilliant. He says, not only the roller case, where you should definitely be obligated to go to exile, because, okay, you weren't so careful about you weren't planning to be so careful about it because, what your roller falls, nothing's going to happen. But when you're lowering down this vessel, it's not good for you if you drop it, your vessel's going to break. And forget about if you're going down a ladder. And if you fall down the ladder, you might break your leg or something, or die, or anything. So what he says is those people are being so careful not to break their vessel, not to break not to fall down from the ladder. Even when they're so careful, they still are liable and they have to go to Ir Miklat. Now, why? Okay. And in fact, what I wanted to suggest is that if you look at this table, right, it almost sounds like Tosfot saying we start off with case number one, it's shogeg. And as we go on, we move closer and closer to ones. And we get almost into shogeg karov la'ones. Now, until now, we always thought shogeg karov la'ones, you're exempt. Tosfot seems to even say that even shogeg somewhat karov la'ones, okay, where we'll put him on the scale, I don't know where he would put these cases. But somewhere karov la'ones, he's going to actually say, you still go to your miklat. Why? Why do you think that? He doesn't really think you're responsible because he thinks you were already being careful. So he must be focusing on the protection element of it. And that answers the question of someone who asked me in the Chavruta, what if they decide that, they want to kill you, the relatives? And what Tosfot says is we have to provide protection for those people as well. And then what does he think about derech aliyah? It's a really good question. It's not so clear. But my guess is that since he's going all the way towards shogeg karov la'ones, he would actually put derech aliyah on the other side. And that's my guess, that he thinks derech aliyah, if you're doing in the upward motion, that's already karov lamezid, and that's why you don't get the protection of the Ir Miklat. Okay, so what we saw today, just to sum up, we took a topic that, as I said, fascinating topic because there's all different elements pulling. The Ir Miklat provides a number of things all at once. It's like something three-dimensional, right? It's providing, on the one hand, protection from the relatives. It's providing, on the other hand, punishment for the person who did something. And then I think there's this added element of atonement. And again, how you view atonement, is atonement somewhat atonement/therapeutic, and that it's providing you with what you need to deal with the fact, we didn't talk about this, but why exile, right? Imagine, God forbid, something like this would happen to you. The first thing you want to do is to leave town, right? You want to be anywhere but with people who know you, who know what happened, who are going to all be looking at you and pitying you, and right? And where do you want to be? In a support group. What better support group are you going to have than a city filled with people who are accidental murderers, right? And that provides this home base and this place where you can work through your issues and deal with it. And what's going on here is, well, who gets this? Both who's deserving of it in a punishment sense and who's deserving of it in the positive sense of all the positive elements that the Ir Miklat has to offer. So these themes are going to take us through the next few classes as well, as we see different sugiyot that deal with it. And with that, we'll finish for tonight. I'll open it for questions. And I hope that you gained some insights about, just to review a few quick things. We saw a lo kashya structure, 2 different sources. Oh, it's not difficult. This is this, this is that. We saw Menahane Mile. Where's the source for this? Because often the Mishnah doesn't give you the sources, and the Gemara wants to fill in the picture. This isn't just a Mishnah. This Mishnah comes from the Torah, and there's basis for this in the text. So they want to merge those together. We had Ema, which is something didn't make sense, so they reread it, right? And say, oh, it must not mean that. That's so obvious. Pshita kind of question. This is so obvious. Must be something more to it. So answer is, let's change the text. And these are certain methodologies that we saw in today's daf. And again, the concepts behind it all, which kind of run as an undercurrent throughout all the sugiyot that we saw about all the different elements of the Ir Miklat. Thank you for joining us.